Hello, and welcome to the live stream happy hour. My name is Eric Brayman. I am the program director with Lane Arts Council and your host for the live stream happy hour. And I am so excited to welcome our very special guest today, Courtney Stubbert. Courtney, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Super excited to have you on today and learn a little bit more about Eugene Contemporary Art and hear some of the awesome stuff that you've been doing with them over the years. I'm going to go ahead and go through my beginning of the live stream spiel, and then we'll jump into hearing all the amazing things about the work that you're doing. So hang tight for just a second. For all those who are tuning in, welcome. Like I said, my name is Eric Brayman. This is the live stream happy hour. We've been doing this for over about a year and a half now as a way to be able to continue connecting artists in our community in these times where we may not be able to gather in person quite as easily as we used to be able to. The months of July and August are especially special for the happy hour because we are celebrating the visual arts in our community in preparation for Visual Arts Week that kicks off at the very beginning of August. So super excited to be able to talk about contemporary art today with Courtney. But please come back every single week and hear about the amazing different visual artists doing cool work and amazing projects in our community. This is also a really great opportunity to remind you of the importance and value of the arts in our community. It takes all of us coming together to support the arts to make sure that they can survive and thrive. And so we encourage all of you who are watching today to please go make a contribution to an arts organization or civil rights organization you care very deeply about, and or go invest in an artist's work locally that you care deeply about. Investing in the arts brings us all alive and helps us all thrive in this incredible time, and especially come back together after a year we've been separated in so many ways. So enough about me. That's my spiel about the arts. Let's get into here about you, Courtney. So Courtney, tell me a little bit about your personal artistry and the type of work that you do locally.
My own work, I guess, is right now I have a I'm trying to maintain a drawing practice. I don't really have a studio at the moment. Kind of work in my garage when I can find clear space. So lately, the thing that I started doing was writing again, trying to use writing as a way to like look back at my old work and try to understand it from being older. And look at past work and try to understand what I was doing and what I want to do now with it. So I found writing to be pretty helpful. So I started a new blog recently to start doing that in a public space. And so I've got some ongoing posts planned that are sort of like unpacking all the little things that appear in my work. So that's kind of the main thing is drawing. I've had a pretty robust painting practice in the past. I'm a visual designer, graphic designer, so there's a lot of digital work that I've done also professionally and just as an artist. And then the main thing that I probably do the most consistently is make experimental music by myself solo, and then with a partner. We kind of use noise and sound design as a way to create textures and weird rhythmic experiments, I guess is the I mean, it's pretty influenced by a lot of late 70s experimental music and what the minimalists were doing, and I consider it a lot like drawing. Actually, it kind of feels like a drawing practice for me in a lot of ways, using sound recording process as a canvas or a surface to draw sound on. It's probably the easiest way to describe it. So it's not like traditional verse, chorus, verse structure song, but I'm kind of more rooted in experimentation and capturing sound textures and field recordings and making weird little noise boxes and plug them into reverb and delay pedals. And it's a lot of fun. I'm not sure how many people want to listen to it, but it's a ton of fun to do. So that's kind of, that's what I do a lot of lately.
That's awesome. I love how much experimentation I kind of hear, and exploration and kind of the work that you're doing from the writing, which is just kind of that process of processing and putting it out there kind of thing, into this realm of like this musical deep exploration and play that gets to be in there, and all the different layers of artistry that you kind of are exploring, it sounds like. It sounds like they probably play a lot with each other, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think most artists would agree that the experimentation and play part is the most fun. The downside of that is finishing anything.
Right.
I struggle with that just like everybody, and that's part of the challenge of trying to make yourself focus and take work to a new level. And so yeah, finishing, that's hard. Experimentation's easy.
Yeah. I love that. Well, I know that also locally you work with Eugene Contemporary Art. So tell me a little bit about your work there with Eugene Contemporary Art and other kind of administrative work you do locally.
Yeah, that's a long running. I mean, it's been 10 years now since it was founded, and we started with a little space in the Whitaker in 2011. Did a Kickstarter campaign, funded about a year and a half, 2 years worth of a residency program called Public Process. Life changed. We gave up the space. I moved it into I had my own design studio professionally for a while, and I moved the project into that space and started doing pop-up shows there, and then moved over to the guys at Barnlight, who owned Slightly Coffee at the time, now Farmers Union, had a space by the courthouse. We started doing pop-up shows there. One thing led to another, and we got our hands on a nice grant that allowed us to get a new space. Now we're down on West 8th near the Wow Hall. Anti-Aesthetic is the name of the space, and I work closely with Agnes Sebeda, who's our program director, and we've got about 15 artist members who work with us. And so and that job has sort of graduated me from artist to administrator in a lot of ways, which is hard to swallow, but it's part of a long-standing interest and desire I have to see contemporary art happen in an accessible way for this community. I grew up here. I'm 6th generation born in Lane County, and there weren't a lot of places to see contemporary art when we started it, and still it can be hard to see the kind of work. It was all about like the work I wanted to see wasn't around. I studied art history at the U of O after I got my design degree, and so I was deeply entrenched in contemporary work, and I was making work of my own, and I was like, I can't see anything in town. There's nowhere to go except for at the time Ditch Projects was around. They still are keeping it locked down over in Springfield. And then since we've been around, Tropical Contemporary has sprung up. And then every once in a while you hear about little projects and pop-up shows, which is like amazing. And I wish everybody could hang on just long enough for others to hear about them. But you really got to catch it like before it goes away. And so right now we're in a fixed space, which is great, but it could disappear. Art spaces in Eugene are have always been kind of tentative and precarious because it's so hard to do and keep money flowing. And so that's what we're doing. We've been in the space since October of 2019. Did one show, immediately hit the pandemic, had to shut down, and then we figured out how to do virtual exhibitions, and then we started doing appointments only, which we're still kind of doing right now. And we've had consistent shows running since I can't even remember. Common Ground was one. If you go to our website, you can see some show history. But right now we've got a show up called Architecture of Dreams with 4 or 5 amazing artists, a few of which are members of our group and a few are from the community. And it's a great sort of show rooted in surrealism and the idea of spaces, sort of liminal subconscious and physical spaces, definitely influenced, I think, by this last year. There's an amazing dollhouse. You should go see it. It's bonkers that one of our artists, Vicky Amoros, who's a writer and performance artist, and she made this amazing surrealist dollhouse. We've got amazing paintings. I could keep talking about that, but we can get back to it later.
Yeah, well, that's super exciting. I love hearing about kind of some of the projects you have in the works, projects that you've done, and how many places Eugene Contemporary Art has kind of shifted around to. And I think that that's a pretty common story, especially a lot of those kind of like pop-up collective type efforts, is trying to find, where can we find our spot in town. And I really love that you brought up, the kind of the nature of visual art spaces around town, that sometimes it can feel temporary. It can feel like uncertain of like, what is the longevity of this? And I think it goes back to that conversation at the very top of this, when I said it's really important we support those spaces when we see them popping up, because the more that we invest in those spaces, support the incredible artists doing the work to create these kind of environments for us, the longer they'll stick around. So a really great motivation to find your appointment to go over and see the cool work that y'all are doing. Well, I don't want to tease them too long. I'd love to be able to show them a few of your pieces, and maybe we'll split this off into 2 different art share your pieces of work. So I want to do a quick share of some of your personal art. And I know that you've got a couple paintings here from way back. So let me get that pulled up. There we go. There it is. So Courtney, tell me a little bit about this painting that we're looking at right here.
Well, both of the ones that I've got here are, like I said, older. They're from 2011, but they're 2 of my favorites from a body of work I did. And I had a show. The space we originally occupied for ECA prior to that had been a gallery a couple different times. And our relationship with that space began when I had a show there. It was called the Voyeur Gallery at the time. So I did this body of work. The show is called Modified Structures, and these are 2 I still have in my house up because I like them. You have different relationships with work as you go through the year. Some they're like friendships where you're like, you used to be cool, but now you suck. I have the same feeling with some of my own work. So these 2 have made the cut, and these are really indicative of how I approach abstraction and my interest in. Started in art school, an interest in cathedral floor plans. I was taking some architecture classes, and I got really interested in the drawings of the Gothic cathedrals and the edges of my textbook, and they were to show off the buttressing patterns and the way the structures were supporting these massive, heavy sort of edifices to belief. That took hundreds of years and probably slave labor to make. So I got really fascinated in those, and they sort of like morphed and formed into other meanings, kind of containers of how we shift our beliefs and ideologies over time. And these play into some work that's coming up in the feed here. That's very text-based work, and how language kind of decays and entropies over time also. So I'm very interested in ideas and ideology and how we shape our own narratives, and how everything is very like flexible, and entropy takes over in different parts of our lives, and we shift and we become different people over time. And so that's kind of what my work's about. That's what I think about when I make it. But I come from a very like design compositional space, since I've been a professional designer for many years. So my work tends to be organized with a certain sort of compositional eye, I guess. But the paintings tend to be very layer based, and I like ripping things and tearing things and gluing things and painting over things and looking through the surfaces to create these sort of spaces your eye can push through. It's very similar to my sound work that I do right now too, like very textural and kind of space to move around. So yeah.
Nice. Well, I love that. I can see why these would be pieces that really stood the test of time. There's such a satisfying color scheme that you've built into these pieces that feel so complementary of each other. And hearing your description of this kind of translation over time and the way that we change and evolve, it's interesting to think about like kind of this color scheme of, it feels like it's evolving, and especially this piece with the kind of right here along the edge. I just love this moment along here and how it translates down into under this blue. I can see that the layering that you kind of played with there with some of those lines in there. And then this red breaking, and I can see your designer element kind of coming in right there. Just beautiful to kind of see these kind of like muddy forms along with these really clean forms.
Yeah.
It's a really inspiring piece, and hearing your kind of inspiration for it also like makes me want to spend another 30 minutes kind of taking it in. So really, really beautiful work. I can see where that comes from. Well, tell us a little bit about maybe these drawings that you've got going on here, and I'll click on these to make them a little bit bigger.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things I felt for a long time is if you feel like you're stuck and trying to start and you don't know where to start, the best thing is to just put the pencil on the surface and just start making lines. And I've used stencils. In the intervening years since those last paintings, I've done a lot of work with stencils and spray paint and text, and most of that work isn't very good. but I'm still really fascinated in how there's an architectural quality to text, and text is really like one aspect of language, but it's not necessarily language in and of itself. It's like a signpost. That language. And so you can see I'm playing with some like text meme sort of initials. But I had a letter form set of like stencils, like a designer would use. And I'm in the process of moving soon. And so my studio, I'm trying to go through it and clean it and put stuff away and get rid of stuff. And this was a simple space that I could go out a couple mornings a week before work and just spend an hour just making something. And these have morphed. I've got a pile of them growing because they're very easy to do and I don't have to think too hard. And then these are bigger pieces that I shift over to after I feel like I've warmed up a little bit. And using a slightly different size tools, and some of my more kind of character objects start to show up in these. And these have been a little more challenging. There are a couple that I did that I really like, and I keep trying to get back to the feeling I felt when I nailed a couple. I was really struggling to get back to those. So this one is close. Again, you can see text in there, and I like to expand phrases that sound like a colloquialism or sound like a euphemism or a meme, but somehow are not quite there. It's almost like they remind you of something familiar, but they're not quite the thing. So they've broken down, or entropy has taken over somehow. This one's pretty deliberate. I like the word sever. It's a strong word. But to break up the way the letters formed with sort of this abstract, like move to the right. I don't know. I liked it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also the forms that are kind of right there to the left of it too feel like indicative of kind of trying to hint at something, but not necessarily fully going there with like an absolute statement. It feels like it leaves you with a little bit of wonder. For me, at least on the left side.
Yeah, these little ghost figures show up in all of my sketchbooks from like the last 10 years. And they've taken everything from like really deliberate Pac-Man ghost figures watercolors to something more akin to like Charlie Brown and the Great Has Trouble with the Scissors.
Yeah.
And I've done different drawings with that drape over architectural forms that are sort of like coming out of the edge. You can sort of see that there's some sort of architectural structure underneath that doesn't seem to match with the shape of the drape under it. And I've played with these a lot, and I like it's like a placeholder for, I don't know, either an identity or an idea or that belief, again, that ideology or that system, that narrative that we tell ourselves, and then it's always covered or it's always hidden from other people, rather.
Right.
Well, we all work so hard at like kind of masking ourselves in a lot of ways. So I don't know. And it's a really satisfying shape to draw, and I'm kind of lazy with it. And so I don't know how long it'll stay around, but I like it.
Yeah, it's cool to see. It's really cool. Well, I skipped over one, but let's check out this one.
That's okay. Yeah, again, similar. Like I work in the web, so my career, I'm a UX designer. So I've had a lot of web elements show up in my drawings because I'm dealing with them all day. Sort of like interactive buttons and arrows and cursors and text fields and things. And so this has a little bit of that with the capsule shape and the arrow. And the glitchy text sort of references that too. But and then the other part of this is this sort of like cowl shape, which is really, at some point a Batman silhouette appeared in one of my paintings as an accident, and it was buried in the back. But then I started doing a bunch of I went through this book I have of Batman comics from Japan, and I started like drawing Batman but taking his body out of it and just having his cape and cowl. And so it always made this different shape, and it was always action-packed and dramatic, but then there was a missing body. So it again kind of alluded to this missing ideal state, I guess, or this missing id or ego, which is it? I don't know which. So these little horn shapes kind of also appear as like abstract lines sort of like form into them in ways. Again, another little object that shows up in a lot of my drawings.
Yeah. I like hearing kind of how you adopt these like pop culture kind of iconography, whether it's, that Charlie Brown ghost, the Pac-Man ghost, this Batman kind of silhouette, but like intentionally kind of manipulated and kind of isolated from its context in some ways. And, in here, I see the Batman now that you said it, but my brain immediately went to like a cat or like a little devil and that's kind of a fun thing, this kind of like opportunity to have something that looks very familiar, this line silhouette is very familiar and yet can be so many things, in the same way that kind of ghost figure could be so many things and could harken back to these pop culture reference. And so it's kind of fun hearing kind of how you're taking these meme type things and kind of slightly just shifting them enough to make it something that inspires a little bit more curiosity, rather than memes, which are so often so obtuse in their ideation and their joke. And that this kind of takes it almost a little bit away from joke and makes it more of a question. That is kind of what I get out of it, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think question is a good way to state that, because I think the goal has always been to subvert known things and break them apart just enough to where they're sort of referencing their original source, but maybe it means something else. You're never sure. Like, I think that's really where my work. I mean, Andy Warhol was a huge influence on me when I was a kid, and Keith Haring and street artists and comic books and pop art, but I don't want to do that stuff directly so much as just take some pieces from it, I guess, for myself.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're learning from, or you're pulling up from some of those greats that were coming before, of kind of manipulating these forms in these ways that allow for the audience to have so much participation in the medium, right? Is something that I'm hearing there. And that's such a big part of, I know that I really value in contemporary art and abstract art. That's really like, yes, I've got a thing. Yes, I've been reflecting on something, but also at the same time, you as a viewer, you have as much say in what you're seeing here as I do as a creator. And that's something that I always really value in this abstract form.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The story you bring to it is just as important as, that's where the conversation happens. That's where the dialogue between the artist and the surface, and then the viewer and the surface. And if you come to ECA and visit our gallery, you might get to have that conversation directly with an artist or somebody else in real life. So the triangle is complete.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I want to move forward with a few more questions. We'll get to see a little bit
Yeah.
more of your art kind of through the course of the conversation today. But we kind of talked a little bit about some of the things that we love about contemporary, but is there anything else you want to kind of add there that really draws you to contemporary art and what you feel it brings to our community and why it's so important to have these spaces with this type of art?
Yeah, I mean, I know that the term contemporary art is a little bit like, it just means the art of now, whatever work is being made now. But I think to be a little more pokey at it, it's really work that wants to engage with culture and society and ideas and philosophy and religion and politics and borders and identity and all of the things, the environment. And it really seeks to be in a space of question asking and challenge. It can be at the extreme. It can be a force for change and advocacy. Social practice is something that's really like grown over the last decade, especially where the lines between art making and advocacy and community development get really blurred. Teaching, education, and contemporary art have really like merged in a lot of ways. People, it's so open and flexible now that work that is meant to provoke or trigger a response beyond what you see on the surface, beyond the material. Material is a secondary concern in a lot of contemporary work, intentionally so, since the 1960s and the birth of like the conceptual art movement. If you go back to Dada and Duchamp and his toilet and all those things, the ready-mades. But, you know, I think Eugene has a really strong, rich kind of formal art community and craft community, which I love and I think is really important and helpful in creating languages and establishing ways of talking about our visual world. Any kind of material culture is in conversation with the rest of material culture. Like if you make an object, contemporary art wants to talk about where is that material sourced from, who was affected by it, what are the questions that it brings up in our current climate crisis, who in power structures, who owns the material, who paid for the material, who labored for the material. You know, all of those things are brought up in contemporary work and go a step beyond just mere, watercolor landscape paintings, which again, I think are great. And we have a rich community of that kind of work, but contemporary work has had a little bit of them. We've been more on the fringe in Eugene, I think, on the edge.
Yeah. Always when you talk about the value of certain forms of art, it's never to negate it's never to say that there isn't value in other forms of art. It's actually, we become so much richer, I think, as a community, the more that we hone into the many forms of art, that by having contemporary exhibits next to a watercolor exhibit, next to a plein air exhibit, next to a classical theater space, next to like modern poetry, you know, like all these pieces come together and they make us as citizens who are investing in this more well-rounded, because we are challenged in different ways in the different spaces we walk into. And we are comforted in different ways. And we have new questions that are asked, or different discoveries that are made, or different awes that we get to kind of step into. And I think that's that's always really important when we're having these conversations about like, why this art? It's like, not why this art in place of other art, it's why this art with all the other art. And I think that's something that I really appreciate that you were mentioning there, that it's all of it together, right? And this provides a very particular element into this whole stream of art that we have local to us. So yeah, really powerful.
And I would maybe also state that you look at contemporary art with a different set of criteria than you would look at other art forms or craft forms. They're not all, like you said, they don't negate each other necessarily. They don't, like, one is not over the other, but they have different criteria. And so whereas a kind of a, plein air landscape painting, it is really interested in the relationship of, the eye of the artist in the world that they're seeing. And that painting can be a window onto the world interpreted through somebody's material. And, with contemporary art, like, beauty is more often a material rather than the focus or the end goal. you know? And so it's a different criteria and it's a different language, but altogether, all art practices build a literacy and a language around understanding the visual world that we're a part of. And whether we want to admit it or think about it or not, like we are like drowning in a visual world, mostly controlled by corporate interests and advertising, you know, and it's art's job to like take back what it can and rewire it and subvert it and put it back into the world as a question. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I want to jump over to a question that came in from actually who was our guest last week on the Happy Hour. So go back and watch last week's episode if you haven't seen it yet. Hannah Stone asked, with our current social media shortened attention span, what do you feel needs to be present in a piece to engage a conversation with the viewer and participant? And what draws someone closer?
That's a good question. I mean, that's a loaded, heavy, very relevant topic, because I know for a fact that Instagram and social media have had a huge influence on how work is created, how it's lit, how it's photographed, the colors that are used. Like there is a whole generation of artists who grew up with that being the primary way to share work. And so I don't know the part of the sentence, what do you feel needs to be present, makes me wonder if that means like the end goal is to draw someone in online. And I don't have an answer. I only want to raise the question of, are you intending to only engage people online? And I know for a fact, like I do this also, use social media and put my work out there. There are ways to do it to make it more clickable or likable or accessible. There are certain color palettes. There are certain ways of lighting work. There are certain kinds of objects that just read well on a screen that's, you know, you can look at while you're sitting on your couch or toilet. I mean, let's be honest, like art is meant to be seen in person, or has been, but since the late 90s and the rise of like post-net art, we have all these new art like ways and modes of working that include the digital experience. So I think, like for me, you saw my drawings, or like you could see where the lighting was kind of bad, and I took them with my phone and they weren't professionally hung and lit with good lighting and a good lens or anything like that. Those might not be what gets a lot of clicks on social media, but if, you know, my paintings tended to pop a little more, right? So I think it really depends on what your end goal is. And are you trying to sell work too? Are you trying to like build your audience and get physical work into people's hands? Or are you digitally focused? Are you working in a post-net art sort of way? Are you making NFTs and doing digital animations or things like that? I think it just depends. I don't know that I have an answer. It's a really good question, one to debate over bourbon and late nights.
Yeah, something else that I see in that question that Hannah presented about like what do you need to do to draw them in? I think it also thinks about what is something that we have to incorporate into our art, knowing that there's a distraction that's present, right? And so that's another thing that actually gets me to another question that I think might be a part of this, which is around the curation process. Because I know that one of the experiences of once you get somebody in person, it's very easy to throw a bunch of art on a wall and have it be an experience that is connected, right? It's really easy to throw pieces of art up and then suddenly have this experience where people are seeing art, but does that take them through the full experience of the art? And I wonder if one of the pieces that connects back to me with this question is that idea of having a distraction by setting up and curating a space where people are so drawn into what's happening in that space that they're not pulled over to social media as a, social media becomes an afterthought because they are there with the space. So I know that you work really closely with a lot of curation process for those shows you do. Tell me a little bit about that. And maybe if there's any connections back to that side of the question that Hannah asked.
I think there is. And I maybe to go back to that really quick before I answer your other question is, I mean, for me, I want to feel the person who made it somehow. I'm still personally drawn to work where you can see the artist's hand or the mistake or the thinking or I think the Italians had a word for it in the Baroque era, the pedimento, where you can see the artist's hand changing or making a decision and changing their mind through the oils. You could see the layers back where they had a shape and then covered it. That's me. And I grew up I was in high school in the 90s, like the height of the ironic, detached, sort of disinterested suspect era, right? Where it wasn't cool to be open and be sincere in any way, shape, or form. And so, I think, again, back to my comment about goals and what are you hoping to do, I think being yourself and being true and sticking to your guns is the most important thing you can do, and being consistent. Because if your goal is to build an audience around your own work, be yourself, be true, you could probably grow a following and develop a fan base or a collector base or some sort of interested group of people around what you're doing. It's really easy to make work that's shiny and bright and bold and easy to hard scroll through with our dopamine rushing through our brains as we pull the lottery handle, like on the, that's what those apps are designed. Social media is designed to trigger that response, to want more. It's not designed to let you sit. So to your question about curation, an interesting thing we found was when we were since we've been in the pandemic and we started doing appointments, a half-hour appointment, people are taking a full half hour to be in the space because it's theirs. Sometimes there's a little overlap, but for the most part, people will sit and watch the full video. Video work is hard to see in a museum or gallery because you come in halfway, you don't know what the plot, there's no narrative. It's like you have to sit and then find the loop and then walk away and think about it. But people would actually do that during appointment sessions. And so what we found was where people might come through on a normal world, pre whatever weirdness we've had, they kind of blow through in like 5-10 minutes. They look at stuff, read things, and we try to have a lot of information to read so you can take something away and understand what's happening. But people really like sit and take time, and it's almost like this ritual or this sacred space that people are like, oh, I'm so glad to just be sitting here quietly looking and thinking about this drawing or this painting or this video or this object. So I think that's sort of the flip of no distractions, no dopamine, no hard scrolling, doom scrolling, as they say, is taking time to really let work absorb you and think about it and wait. And I have ADD and I have a hard time sitting still, and meditation has eluded me as much as I would love to. It's a life goal to figure out how to do it. And I know you just have to start, but our brains are just like constantly inundated with information, and it's really hard to find a quiet space to just sit and think about, what's in it for you to look at one of my stencil drawings and think about, I think there's something that happens in the brain when you sit longer than 10 minutes and think about it, one thing. You get to a new space, you get to a deeper level. Just, it's like meditation, you go one layer deeper every time you pass a few minutes on the clock. And I don't think there's a solution for social media art, sharing online. I don't know what the hack is, except to be yourself and stick to your guns and ignore trends and do what you want to do. Like, be true to follow your heart, man.
You sound like a true artist right now. I love that. Well, let's jump into this conversation because I do want to bring up the current show that you just curated, or that you supported in the curation process of, that's on view at the Anti-Aesthetic Space. Tell me a little bit about some of those considerations you take in when you are building a show and you are selecting those works to put together and deciding how to display them and how to make that experience where someone, when they walk in, is able to fall into the work and really see either the connections or juxtapositions in the work that they're viewing.
Yeah. We've had all group shows. Most of what we do is group shows. We've not had any solo shows for a while, not in our new space anyways. And so, when you step back and look at an individual artist's body of work and take in their headspace and what they think about and what their interests are, it's a balance. It's a balance between what the artist does and what they're thinking about and how it looks and how it hangs on the wall. You have to think about the space around it, not crowding it, but making sure that a gallery hanging work is an art unto itself. It's a presentation. You are communicating a thing. And so most of our shows have been themed or have sort of an overarching narrative that we intentionally put in place so that when the when a viewer comes in who may not have all the criteria and the language and the literacy in place, we don't want to assume anyone's knowledge around contemporary art. So we try to leave a lot of like things in place, wall text, takeaways, zines, at least having a handout and a map so people know what the work's made of at a bare minimum. All of these pieces go together to make a collective experience. And so you have to balance it. I think in the show change, it depends on the theme of the show. For a Common Ground show, it was about ecology, the intersection of ecology and art. And so a lot of that had to just do with visual tone and the nature of the concept behind the work and how it felt next to each other as you were walking through it. Some pieces demanded a little more space. Some pieces were very like sort of elegantly finished. Others were more raw intentionally. That was like the goal. And so deciding how those felt next to each other, just on a pure formal level, definitely part of the consideration. For our critical conversation show, which was about the intersection of privilege and art, white privilege and art making, we had a mix of artists of color and white artists together in the space, intentionally trying to like call attention to the potential tension between the headspaces. Like some artists don't have any access. Some artists have not had privilege or access to get into a space. Other artists have had it for their whole career. But we had to make sure that the artists were okay with their work being next to other artists if it felt tense or like complicated at a minimum. And so that was almost more of a social practice project than it was an exhibition, because we were trying to hear everybody and listen and take care of it, how everyone felt and how their work was perceived. And so, yeah, and we had artists from all age ranges, all experiences in that show, different backgrounds. And so that had a different approach, because ecology is something that affects all of us in a different headspace than race and privilege affects all of us.
Right.
And so you have to take each show a little bit on its own terms, and just a lot of it's gut and taste too, and which then opens up the question of gatekeeper and who's in control. But we have people who we work with the artists and our program director, and we work as a group to sort of reach a consensus. And then at the end of the day, it's me and the program director going, no, that doesn't look good next to that. Let's move it over there.
Yeah. Well, I really love thinking about this idea of how much is taken into consideration when putting a show together. And I think that's something that is often forgotten, that you brought up the social elements, the literal aesthetic elements, the physical space requirement elements, the hanging experience requirements. Like there's so much layering that goes into it. And a really good gallery, I think, parallels to a metaphor about a really good theatrical show. A really good theatrical design will never have you think about the set, or will never have you think about the lights, will never have you think about the sound. You will just experience and hear the story. Never have you think about the actors. Same thing in a gallery. You'll never think about you'll never have a moment that wasn't intentionally designed when you're in a really good designed gallery. Yeah. I think about those moments that I've had in galleries. I think about one piece at a gallery I was in, the biggest gallery that's in London. What's the big one that is?
The Tate?
Yes, the Tate. And there was entry from like this exhibit that was about it was outlines of houses. I think it was like a bunch of houses and the blueprints of it. And then you walked through this threshold, and it was all this intense protest art. And it was such an intense juxtaposition. And there was this giant flag that was there. And I just like stopped in my tracks. Like something about this flag is like so gutturally different than where I just was in this clean aesthetic. And then you hear the story of the origin of like all these pieces that are from intense protest moments through history around the world. And it was like, what brilliant design to take you from this very like clean and simple and precise and mathematical moment into this intense revolt. It felt like a protest kick starting, right? It felt, you got that same kind of guttural feeling of when these big moments of unrest happen. And I think that that's something that for me, I as I was walking, I was like, why did that hit me so hard? It's like, oh my God, what brilliant design.
Right.
And I think it's something that comes in when you start to understand what you're seeing, but often is something that's forgotten as well.
Yeah, it's very much a composition. If you think about it like a film score, like you don't want it to intrude on what's happening. You want to support what's happening. And so exhibition curation is very much a design question. It's very much an aesthetic composition, but all in support of respecting the artist's intention and respecting the viewer. So a lot of exhibition design is sort of like a customer experience question. Like, what is your experience when you come into the gallery? Like, what experience do I want you to have as someone who runs an organization? What do I want you to take away with? Were you greeted when you came in? Was the work easy to understand? Did you get all the information you needed? Did you leave with questions? Well, I just don't want you to have questions about how it was hung. I want you to have questions about the work itself. And so it's definitely about hiding those lines and hiding the hanging and the nails and the mud and the plaster and the paint and, you know, all of those things, because you want to feel the ebb and the flow of the work as you move from one piece to the next. Yeah. The theater thing is a good analogy.
Yeah. Well, I want to jump forward because I want to be able to make sure that we can check out one of the really cool shows that's going on right now in Anti-Aesthetic, and Eugene Contemporary Art. So tell me a little bit about this project that we have a few pictures here for. It sounds like the name of the show is Architecture of Dreams. Tell me a little bit about this.
Yeah, well, this was a show, like a lot of what we're trying to do right now is provide our artists opportunity to come with exhibition ideas and show ideas, and we help them. We're basically like ECA exists as a platform to support artists first, and then to be accessible and communicate what's happening with the work to the community. So Architecture of Dreams is a good example of one of our artists came to us with a show idea. We found a few other artists who wanted to help curate it. So it was a 3-person sort of project working with our program director. I did the logo, but that's what they let me do. And then I just sat back and let them do the awesome work. But yeah, like I said at the beginning, the show kind of like took its cues from surrealism and the idea of spaces, whether those were subconscious or spiritual or physical. And so the idea came from Vicky Amorose, who did the dollhouse, the surrealist dollhouse. This piece is by one of our artists, Jill Baker, who is from Corvallis, and she has an accompanying video. This is a drawing of a shelter her son made out of objects in their yard, and there's a video of that work. And so it was like this sort of just long, peaceful kind of video watching a kid build a space for themselves in the yard out of bricks and stones and wood. And as a parent, I totally find that a kind of a beautiful space because I have kids myself. Building a fort, we all have that sort of memory of childhood of building a space for ourselves. So she has this drawing, she has the video, and then she has some objects that relate to both in the space. What's next? This is by Noelle Herseg. I was worried about saying her last name wrong, but this was a cyanotype, a photograph printed on, I think it's silk, I'm not sure. But she has a series of photographs that are printed in this very like ethereal, delicate way that sort of just that's a barely perceptible view of a window or a sort of a space that represents an opening or a portal to another space. And she printed them on different objects. So this is one of hers, and she was one of the co-curators along with Jill. So Vicky, Jill, and Noelle were all co-curators of this show.
Yeah, this feels like a really great example of a piece that a picture can't do it justice. I can see that this is one that in person is a completely different experience.
Yeah, and when the light is right in the space, it's just sort of magical, really.
Awesome.
So here we have a view of Leah Howell, who is a ceramicist, and she made these kind of kitchen objects, and then you see this big envelope. So sort of referencing to early surrealist sculpture. And if you remember, like, I just remember like ready-mades, Duchamp's ready-mades, or Mayor Oppenheim's like fur teacup and spoon. So they kind of have that feel, but they're just like mundane kitchen objects that are sort of elevated to this like magical erect state where there's this like kind of like important tension in them, and in calling it's like a little forest, and she has a few other objects hanging in the space also, made out of ceramics. They're just very kind of weighty and delicate at the same time. And the paintings in the back are by Wendy Heldman, who did a series of acrylic paintings of her domestic space. So her home with her kids and their bedrooms and their toy shelves and the drawers that her daughter sort of changed over the years. The bed, there's another, the bed is, Mary Evans is an artist. And so she takes her work cues from her experience in kind of the supernatural and witchcraft and dreams. And I think I'm going to botch this, I know it, but my take on these pieces is rooted in sort of a teenage dream state. So she made this very like comfy surrealist dream with all of these symbols and objects around. And you can actually lay on that bed if you wanted. It's a real bed.
Ooh.
So, yeah, it's cozy.
Yeah. I love art that lets you interact with it.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Mary, if I misspoke about how your work is meant to be perceived. This is a close-up of one of Wendy's pieces, a play table with, I think, some Playmobil and Legos and cars. All very familiar to me, having kids with Legos and objects all over the place. Just very like, I don't know, like I think as people, we are inhabited by all versions of ourselves at all times. You know, we're always like that 7-year-old, that 13-year-old, that 18 or 22-year-old or whatever. Depends on our mood and how much we slept.
Yeah.
You know, so I just find all of these, her paintings to be very, the imagination of a kid is such a rich, deep space, but then as a parent, you have a relationship with all of these objects, and you're at once encouraging a child to like dive into their imagination. And as a parent, you're always trying to find ways to like, how do we get rid of this? They haven't touched it once.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the ever fight, I think.
Yeah. This is a close-up of Vicky's dollhouse. And I mean, this thing is magic. And she has a video that she sent me this week. And I'm sorry, Vicky, I have not posted it yet, and I will. But there's a video that she did with some narration and goes through the whole house and describes all these rooms and sort of a surrealist manifesto sort of vibe. And it's an amazing thing. There's a flashlight in the space. If you go, there's a flashlight so you can like go through the dark corners and look at everything as if you're discovering it like an archaeologist.
I love that.
A dream archaeologist.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, what a wonderful collection just from these examples of the pieces there that are coming from such different perspectives as well, from like these very whimsical and very abstract, and almost you have to try and find what is that object, what is this image of, to these very like almost practical realism moments that are still so magical in their depiction of just the magic of the person who's interacting with these things, right? That the magic can be right there in the wonder, and the magic can be there in the reference. Yeah. And so this is a really exciting collection. And so remind us how people can get in there and see this collection with y'all.
Go to eugenecontemporary.com/appointments, I believe, and you can sign up to have an appointment. That way we can still sort of manage just on the air of the side of health safety for everyone. And you can pick a slot and come in and have it all to yourself and ask questions with the person who's sitting in the gallery with you, and just enjoy it. Take some time out of your busy day. Put your phone in your bag, put it in your pocket. If you want to take pictures and share it online, please do with our link. Make sure you put our link in there.
Yeah. I love that. That's really fantastic. And the link for Eugene Contemporary Art is right there pinned in the comments section. You can also see it scrolling across here at the bottom of the video. So please do go check that out and support Eugene Contemporary Art and these amazing artists that have created such wonderful and whimsical works. It's really exciting. Well, we're getting really tight on time, Courtney, but I do have another really important question I wanted to throw out to you that I was excited to kind of get your perspective on. Is that I know that you're also a really big advocate for artists locally. That's evident from the work that you've been doing with Eugene Contemporary Art to try and create these spaces for these artists locally and beyond our local community who can come in and help enrich our lives here in town. So how do you work as an advocate beyond that, as well as an artist for artists in our community? And what would you say are some ways that we could all become advocates for artists?
Oh man, you're asking me this with 5 minutes to go.
You can go over a little bit.
Well, this is a big part of our mission, to be artists first and then community. And from my perspective, the big thing that we do and we focus on is making sure everyone gets paid. So if you show in our space, we pay you, and that's very transparent, and we talk about that up front. And so for me and Agnes, our program director, this is a big deal because artists are often thought of last when it comes to market viability. We live in a consumerist capitalist culture that ascribes value with money, or equates value with money. But art making is not something that is inherently risk-free. We're not trying to fill a line on a spreadsheet and quantify the value of what we do in monetary or impact terms. This is something that drives me nuts when we're writing grants, and we're doing a grant right now, a big one, writing a grant. And you have to create this narrative that seeks to appease our economic system, but actually really does little to acknowledge the truth around what value art provides a community. And it's not a monetary value. There are other ways to talk about value without bringing money into it. So for us, the first thing is to pay artists, pay writers. If we ask someone to come in and shoot the work for our website, we make sure we have budget money to do it. We pay them. That's a kind of like a religious sort of baseline that we try to do. I think we almost were 100% successful over the last year and a half.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's really hard. It slows you down because it's easy to put on a show with friends. Everyone's got artwork. Everyone wants to see their work seen and share it. But to like shift the priorities and make sure that, especially in a town like Eugene, where there are a lot of art advocates, but this isn't a collecting town. But still, you just get people asking you, why don't you sell work? Are you a gallery? Do you sell work? And like, sure, we'll sell work, but that's not our focus. And that's a whole infrastructural layer that creates a ton of work that's not about our mission. So I'm happy to sell artists' work, and we take a very, very small percentage of our work that's shown, not the typical 50% or whatever the galleries do. That's not, because that's not our focus. But as a nonprofit now, we have to take something. We're forced to. Nonprofits were invented to kind of launder rich people's money, to be blunt. And so the system in place doesn't help an independent organization that is trying to find a better way to adapt to its own community and its own context. So we don't operate in the same way that a nonprofit in New York City might, or Seattle or LA, right? This is Eugene. We're under 200,000 people. We have a long history of making and craft and art practice here, and advocacy and political action. We're our own beast, right? And so how do you make contemporary work and advocate for an artist, position in society and the value that they provide society? How do you elevate that? And for us, it's making sure that if you invite an artist to the table, the artist has skin in the game. Oftentimes artists are like, organizations will try to advocate for the arts, but it is in the context of business, valuing the business, helping your business grow. And I understand the methods there, but it reiterates and reinforces negative practices that harm artists and don't help artists labor and the time that they spend asking questions, working on their practice, be valued on at the same table as any widget in the marketplace, whatever. It doesn't mean anything, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So paying artists is like the tip of an iceberg that we're very intense about. The other thing that we're not doing right now is we don't charge our artist members a fee to be a part of ECA. It's an invitation juried sort of membership, but it seems counterintuitive to charge the people you were there to serve and provide community for. So that's also hard and has it has problems because the system is set up to be different and people's expectations are different. But if you would do anything for the arts, is insist on making sure there's a budget line that pays an artist. And if you need a resource, we use wageforwork.com, which is a nonprofit in New York City that has established a kind of a calculator for paying artists based on your annual income and expenses and revenue, right? So the size of the organization determines how much you would pay an artist. So we're so small, we're at the very bottom. And it seems really inconsequential to some people, but it's a really big deal to others. And so for us, it's really about being a voice in Eugene about giving artists a skin in the game.
Awesome.
If you're an artist, value what you do and charge money for it. Don't do shit for free.
I could never boost that more. That is so much. Yes, 100%. We should not be trying to pay people an exposure and all those silly, horrendous things that have been established in the practice of our society. And yeah, artists, it's for the time for a piece, a work of art is not just the time it took to create that work of art. It's the time it took to build the skills to also create that work of art. And I love that you were talking about the overall part of the artist, what it takes to be an artist. And what we were talking about at the beginning, the play, the experimentation, the wandering to researching, to compiling, to collecting, all those pieces come into play for the creation of a work. And to honor and acknowledge that in the final payment for an artist for the work that they're doing is essential. And it's really easy to look at a piece of art and say, oh, that's so overpriced. But you got to remember how much goes into that type of work and that type of lifestyle as well, which is like you said, it's a tough lifestyle sometimes. It's a really challenging one, and it's not one that's without risks.
Yeah, and it requires artists to be creative with how they approach the different scenarios they find themselves in. If you're in a commercial gallery, that's different than selling work on your website or selling, some of your work on a T-shirt or something. Like the reasons people buy work are vast and weird. Just like buying a house or a car or whatever. Like everyone has personal reasons. So there's another side to this. That's a whole other conversation that I'd happily talk to people about. I also see Hannah Stone asked another question about UX design and exhibit design. That is also a big topic. Hannah, please email me if you want to talk about it. I'm happy to chat with you.
I'm glad that you pointed that out, Courtney, because I was acknowledging that we didn't get to that question. I was like, we're not going to have time. So connections are officially made. Courtney and Hannah, meet each other. Welcome. Well, Courtney, thank you so much for this incredible conversation. It was rich. It was provocative. You are such an intelligent person who brings such a wealth of understanding of the arts world with you, clearly into the art that you create, but also into the art that you advocate for in the community. So thank you to you and everyone at Eugene Contemporary Art who's doing that work to bring that to our community.
Yeah, it's a big crew. It's not just me. I'm just the problem that started it. And like it wouldn't happen without everybody who helps and all the artists involved. I mean, that's really the core of what it is. So
yeah, and they can people who are watching can find out about all the artists that are part of the Eugene Contemporary Arts Collective on the website, right? You all are listed on there.
On the about page, I think it's up to date. I should double check, but yeah, everyone's on there. Everyone's
at least you'll find a lot of the folks.
Yeah, no, they're all on there. They're there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Courtney. This was absolutely fantastic. We so appreciate your time and your wisdom. And for everyone who's watching, we will be back again next week and through again the months of July and August, celebrating the incredible visual arts that are happening here in our community. So please tune in, tell your friends, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye now.
Thanks, Eric.